tonight's theme is one that is very, very relatable to the lizard, and personally very exciting to me. My great-great-grandfather, Willie Mitchell, was a Serpentine mason, and his table, one of the tables that he made, is actually stored in the Cornwall Museum. Malcolm and I went to look recently, only to be told that it's been moved. It's in the Courtney Library at the moment, but Serpentine runs through a lot of Cornish families, and I think we will all be really delighted to hear tonight from Mike Sagar-Fenton. So should we give him a round of applause?
Hello everybody, thank you all for turning out. A horrible night. I'm thrilled to see you all and very honoured to be asked. Thank you very much for asking me. Just a brief word about myself. I'm a Penzance boy, but quite local. And really I was asked to do a book about Serpentine, not because of my incredible knowledge of geology, which I didn't even study at school, but because I'm a writer, and Penley House did an exhibition and said, we need a book for this, will you write it? I said, yeah, of course I will. Where shall I start, you know? I should have had Ben actually beside me, that would have been very helpful. But anyway, so I spent a lot of time then teaching myself as much as I could and visiting all the places in the lizard that I could, because I fell in love with the lizard as well. I should put my mic on, shouldn't I, probably? And is that on? Is that on?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's on. And yes, I caused my children, particularly my daughter, great displeasure as I kept on going from one lizard beach to another over weekends, picking up rocks and going, cool, look at that. And she didn't really see the point. But anyway, it is a fantastic story, and it's a very old story. I certainly won't be speaking from personal knowledge or even personal research or anybody else's research about the elements of Serpentine, because they took place about 350 million years ago. Although, actually, as another thing I discovered which astonished me was that if you go to the lizard and you look at the reef, the Man of War reef off the lizard, you're actually, according to my sources, looking at one of the oldest objects in the world. It's supposed to be 500 million years old. It's completely unrelated to the lizard itself. It came from a different continent. It just got scraped against the lizard in one of these extraordinary events, and it's about 150 years older than the lizard. So you have to get used to that sort of incredible sort of well of time that you've got to peer into to understand these things. But anyway, this all began in the Southern Ocean, round about sort of New Zealandish, really, a long way from here, where there were two supercontinents which were, as we know now, movable. They didn't seem so at the time. Apparently, I discovered that England and America are moving apart at the rate of 20 millimeters per year. I don't suppose anybody's too sorry about that at the moment, but but that means that since I wrote that book, it's gone 20 centimeters further away. I'm quite pleased about that. But anyway, so the supercontinents were a phenomenon. They floated on the Earth, as they still do, and they still move. You know, the Himalayas are just caused by a supercontinent banging into another supercontinent and pushing up a load of mountains over millennia. But the ones that were concerned with our story, they were mobile, but they had a sort of quite a large strait of water between them. And in that large strait of water, there was a massive eruption from the Earth's crust, I'd say about 350 million years ago, which sent a huge amount of matter, of molten stone up through the ocean, causing a great deal of steam, I should think, and eventually settling into a landmass between the two continents, where it lay for about 100 million years, cooling down a bit. Meantime, apparently, as it came up through the Earth's crust, of course, it gathered lots of different varieties of geology, the different layers that it was coming through. Anyway, so when that was cooling down, these two supercontinents gradually moved together. And this is the unique part of Serpentine, is that when they actually, very, very slowly, obviously, but they moved together, they created a big pressure on this central island. And as they got more crushing together, they raised the temperature of it. And so it almost was remolten. So it was like cooked twice, if you like. You know, it had cooled down and it was cooked twice, so it was all mixed up again. And so all the minerals in it, none of them stayed in the places they were. They all got boiled up and stirred. And then that attached itself to one of the supercontinents, and it decided to go north. And about 250 years ago, it crossed the equator. I always think, you know, the boys saying, "Oh, not far to Cornwall now, boys," you know. And then it gradually sorted itself out, and as Europe sorted itself out, and the channel formed and separated us from the rest of Europe, and it became part of the south. This particular bit became part of the south part of the lizard. And so it solved a problem in my mind, because I live on Mounts Bay, and that's where I come from. And it's always puzzled me when I learnt about geology, because if you look at Cornwall's like that, isn't it? It drives into the prevailing weather like a ship's bow, except for the lizard, which stands right across it. You know, it's illogical, because it gets terrible wind and weather on well. But, you know, you get the full force of the elements right, you know, it doesn't go past you, it really hits you there. And I'd never understood that until I did the research about this book. But that's why, that's the grafting onto the landmass that happened. So it became part of the south part of the lizard, and it wasn't a particularly welcome part. Serpentine not rare. I mean, Serpentine, there's deposits of serpentine scattered around the fringes of Britain. There's a lot of it in California. There's about 200 miles of it in Australia, but it's all one colour. It's all basically olive green, and not very exciting. But it makes for very poor farming land. It's hard to cultivate. You don't get much on it. Added to the fact that because lizard was on the seabed, so it's very, very flat, and so it's terribly weather and wind blown, and also very difficult to cultivate. So really, Serpentine most of its history was regarded as a curse rather than a blessing. However, how did it start being an industry? There's a loose legend that some sailor came ashore, picked up a bit and thought, oh, that's unusual, and started working it into something or other. I find that complete nonsense, because I've spent a lot of time walking on the lizard, and especially on a day like today, you go over a stile, you go past a wall even, and you see green, you see blues, you see scarlet, you see, this fantastic thing you don't see anywhere else. And I can't believe it escaped the knowledge of the attention of the locals for all that time until some sailor turned up. And I think it was a hobby. I think people, had spare time. They made bits of it. Nobody else visited here, so they didn't have any sale for it, but they made it to give to each other, I think. And it was never an industry. It was just something that the lizard had. And then what is true is a gentleman from Penzance called Mr. Drew came over to help repair the lighthouse. And he spent long winter evenings at the lizard, where there isn't a lot to do, and long winter evenings in Victorian times. And so he really got into making bits of serpentine. And he put it about. And then people began to take an interest, because there's there's always been a market for marble, you know, and Serpentine is a marble. The Serpentine we have is definitely a marble. And, you know, wealthy people would import marble from Italy and Spain and Portugal, you know, the fine places where the classic marbles come from. And so to introduce something which was a Cornish marble, which was a British marble, was a novelty. And so masons began to take an interest in it, to make large bits of masonry, you know, tables and fireplaces and things like that. And so the quarries started opening up. And the lizard part in that really was just to provide the raw stone. They just provided the stone. It went on boats and off it went to, well, the nearest one was Truro, but, you know, up country to these skilled marble workers who would then turn it into something they could sell. And that went on for quite a while until Penzance came into the picture, because Mr. Drew had moved back to Penzance then, and he got several of his friends interested in Serpentine as a thing. And they started making a bit of it, and it went very well. And they started making some more. And they thought, well, actually, and I ought to pick up some pictures here, because I'm miles behind. Oh, where do we go? That's just a bit of Kynance. That's a wall. It might be a mullion, actually. I'm not quite sure. That's Grade Church. That's Grade Church, which is like your church, made out of big serpentine blocks. We'll come back to those. And that is what I'm looking for. So in Penzance, they looked for a suitable premises to actually make it on a big scale. And they found this. And that was the building of what was the Werrytown Mine. Werrytown Mine, as anybody who's interested in Cornish mining knows, is quite spectacular in a way, because a prospector from Bragg was walking, I should think, a low spring tide off that bit of Penzance known as Werrytown to the west of Penzance, and he had a look down and he thought, well, that looks quite promising, but it's miles below, you know, high water mark, and so to actually build a mine on it was a huge operation. But he did. He built a cofferdam around this thing, nice, you know, solid walls and everything else like that. And the poor old miners had to go below, go out to sea, climb in, climb down, go below, listening to the sea above them, for years and years and years. It was a very successful mine, and it was so successful it had this building, you know, which was part of its structure, and had a steam engine in it, and had a big jetty going out from there to load onto ships, and yes, it did very, very well until one night in about 1789 or something like that. There was a storm, and an American schooner got loose, and high tide banged into the headworks, knocked them down, and flooded the mine. At which point, I think it was half worked out, and I think they thought that's not worth it anymore. So that building was going free, really. It was just used as a hall. So Mr. Organ, it was the chief chap in Penzance, and he got a company together and started producing, importing serpentine blocks from your way, and then making things out of it. They were all big things then. People were into classic architecture and fittings. They wanted big sort of obelisks. They wanted big vases, you know, that as big as me, you know, that would be in a doorway of a grand house, or they wanted a massive fireplace, or even a table, you know, or something on a large scale. And so they were a potential market. And also churches, several churches took an interest in it. And so it became quite a decent little operation, and and went on very, very successfully for lots of years. Let me find out what's next on the thing. So stuff like this. That's gorgeous, isn't it? Yeah, can you see all that? So you can see it right now. Yeah, that's just in a little a ordinary house in Penzance, but it's beautiful. I mean, this is the sort of scale they're working on, and they would export that to whoever would have the money to pay for it. But it after a while, and I'm not putting down lizard people at all, but after a while, people on the lizard thought, hang on a minute, you know, we're sending them all this stone. We've opened 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 quarries, you know, to pick up stone, to put on boats, to put to Penzance, for them to sell, make pieces and sell for a fortune. So why don't we do it? And so that idea took a while to catch on, but eventually they decided that they would try and do it on their own. They imported a few miners from Derbyshire, where they worked on Blue John mines, which is similar, different, but similar. And they brought them down and they prospected round the lizard to say where's a suitable place. Well, the first thing you needed for a factory in 1850 was a river, a stream, because then what you did then is you dam it up, and then you've got a head of water, and then you've got the launders and everything for a water wheel, and that will be your chief propulsion. This is because you can't afford put a steam engine down in some cove somewhere. It's a lot of expense, so they needed form of propulsion. So they ordered this massive water wheel from Helston, and they dammed up the stream, and obviously that took a while to make a decent lake, but they did that. They built a house for the manager, and this all happened down in Poltesco Cove, or Carlane Cove, which is really... And Carlane Cove wasn't unknown. It's next. It's, for those of you who don't know, it's the next one down from Cadgwith. It had a fishing history. It had a capstan house. You know, they ran capstan houses, and it had a big building, you know, for storage and things like that on the beach. A couple of cottages, but it never really took off as a place, a fishing place, for a couple of reasons. One is because there's a Poltesco rock, which is obviously fairly unfriendly feature, not very far offshore. You've got to know about it. And the other reason was that Cadgwith was much more successful, and it wasn't, you know, just around the corner. So Cadgwith really took all the trade in the end. Poltesco was abandoned, and that's how it was when they found it. So they looked at it and they thought, well, I thought that, you know, it's got everything we want. So they went ahead, they spent the money, and hang on, that's a church. And this is what it looks like now. All out of order here. Okay, no, I think we've actually missed out quite a lot here. Sorry about that. Ah,
Oh,
there we go. So that's the only known picture of the Serpentine works in Poltesco. But as you can see, there's the big house, the big fishing building there, and all that gradually inhabited the whole valley. There's the water wheel and the wheel pit, which is still there, which we'll have a look when we walk down there. And next to the wheel pit, there's a length of flat stone where they used to actually do the cutting, some of the cutting with the saw that was moved to and fro by the wheel. Thank goodness. It's a very, very boring. It's a very slow process, cutting serpentine. And there's still marks on there where the cutting was taking place. So that was a very hefty enterprise, as you can see. It didn't all grow like that, but it grew and grew, and it had its own markets. It had a quay, so it was able to. It had, and gradually it showed great advantages over Penzance, because they could literally, you know, get the stone down from the quarry, Flagstaff, or one of the big quarries around there, and I'm quite in awe of the fact that it was taken down by horse and cart. There's a very steep cobble path down to it. I wouldn't have liked to be doing that, but anyway. So they got it down to the bottom, and there it was, and they cut it and shaped it and made whatever was in demand at the time, and they packed it into packing cases with straw and took it out in the jetty and put it on a boat to wherever it was going to go to. And so and both these companies, the Penzance one and the Poltesco one, formed limited companies and had a sales force, and they both had posh offices in the middle of London. One of them in Pall Mall, and the other one in but so they were a big deal, and they went head to head for about 20 years. But actually, Penzance was on a loser, because Penzance really, I mean, a lot of the men who'd gone to work in Penzance were lizard men, obviously. I mean, they knew what they were doing. And so the poor souls used to walk over to Penzance, you know, on a Monday morning and lodge there all week and then walk back on a Saturday. But, you know, provided with a works on their own doorstep, of course, they immediately left Penzance with glad to work in Poltesco. So Penzance started to suffer by comparison, and by price it was a lot cheaper to do it on the spot than it was to do our transporting. And so Penzance's trade was starting to decline, but Penzance had actually Serpentine had an enormous stroke of luck in the late 1840s. And that was when the royal family decided to take a boat trip. You probably all know about this. And they put Albert ashore at Kynance. Now, they say perhaps he was seasick. I don't know. If I was seasick, I'd rather stay on a boat than go in a skiff to Kynance, really. But anyway, so he came ashore, and he was a very innovative and interested and wide-ranging, quite well-read and learned man. Albert was, and he was fascinated to be told about Serpentine. He had no idea that there was any fine marble to be made anywhere except on the continent. And so he went round, I think, probably by land, and met the rest of them in Penzance, where he actually landed by accident on the end of a pier they were building, which is now called the Albert Pier in his honour. And they all landed, and the family and the children all went round to the Warrowtown Works and had a look at it. It's marvellous. And at that time they were building this, to my mind, a spectacularly ugly house called Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, which was their sort of holiday home. And so they ordered tables and vases and tazes and, you know, all sorts of things for the house. And you know, in those days there was only one celebrity line in the country, and that was the royal family and the well-born. And so all those royal hangers-on, they'll say, oh, yeah, right, okay. If it's good enough for them, perhaps we should have some. And so people from Hampton Court, Chatsworth, big houses, you know, and Westminster Abbey and places like that all started taking interest and ordering stuff. The trump card that Albert had up his sleeve was he was planning the Great Exhibition, which was to be a celebration of art and culture and manufacture, because he was a practical sort of man, from all over Europe, you know, gathered in one place in London. I don't know if you've ever been to the site of the Great Exhibition, but in Hyde Park, it's kind of out the way, but it's huge. It's absolutely massive. About 4 rugby pitches. It's huge. And they built the thing called the Crystal Palace, which was, you know, everybody said was going to fall down as soon as it went up. And yes, it's in my book, but they tested whether it would stand a lot of people in it by marching a large number of soldiers into it when it had been built, and making them jump up and down and march in step, you know, and things like that. And it stayed up, and so they thought, oh, well, that's all right. I'd love to have seen that. But anyway, so the Great Exhibition took place in 1851, and pride of place in lots of ways was the British marble, because, you know, although he was not British himself, Albert was very, very proud of anything British, and so the British marble was a bit of a coup, and of course, because marble people from all over the world and buyers from all over the world came and looked, and they said, "Oh my goodness, we haven't seen that before. We haven't got that at home." And so it really was a huge boost to Serpentine, and it took off in a big way. But as I say, the Penzance operation eventually did dwindle and die, and but the Poltesco one carried on for a long time. After the Great Exhibition, it has to be said that the other importers of marble were not very nice about Serpentine. They didn't like it. They wrote articles saying, "Oh, it's no good. It weathers in the weather and everything else. You know, it wears away and everything." And they were invited to come down and look at places like Mullion Church and say, "Yes, okay, well, it's not done badly, is it? In the wind and the weather in Cornwall." So, but there was one thing. Serpentine did have one problem, and that is that cut into narrow sheets, and they clad the Bank of England in it. That's what they thought of it. Cut into very narrow sheets, it can suffer from extremes of temperature, and unfortunately, the Bank of England does suffer from extremes of temperature. Gets very hot in the summer, gets very cold in the winter, gets a lot of vibration from even in those days from passing traffic and so on and so forth. And so, unfortunately, the sheeting on the front of the Bank of England started to crack, and that was really the beginning of the end of its enormous popularity, because the other marble people took one look at that, said, "Ha ha 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 ha! So we all told you, you know, and you would go ahead, and anyway, you better carry on getting marble from Italy and all those other places that we have sold you over the years." So Serpentine's vogue crested then, and then sank. And Serpentine and Poltesco closed in, I can't remember actually, late 19th century. And that seemed to be the sort of end of it, because the turners are actually at the Lizard, and possibly here in Mullion as well, at the time, carried on making, where they'd begun, the small stuff, the pretty stuff to attract people who came. At that point, not many people did come. There was a few. It had a bit of a vogue in Victorian times, because there seemed to be an awful lot of unemployed vicars who wrote lots of things about botany and natural history and things like that, and they discovered the lizard heath, which is it called lizard heath? Yeah. Which is a plant that's unique to the lizard. So all these sort of plant collectors, they came running down. Arthur Conan Doyle came down and wrote a very terrifying story, a Sherlock Holmes story, and other people. Tennyson came here, and celebrity visitors turned up and went away again. But mass tourism obviously wasn't a thing, so they didn't. And mass tourism didn't become a thing really until the railway. So when the railway came, which I think 1897, I think it came to Helston. And sadly, Helston was built as a through station. I didn't know that for all the years I was on it, but it was actually built as a through station, and the GWR was intending to carry the line all the way down to the Lizard, which would have been a very spectacular ride, wouldn't it? I must say. They just didn't. There was £100,000, I think, and they decided it wasn't worth it, and so they didn't do it. But they did run charabancs down from Helston, and visitors who began to enjoy the train and started to open up Cornwall, they came down, and of course, oh look, we've got Serpentine. Look, you haven't got this at home. How do you like something that you can take home to Granny that isn't from anywhere else? And so there was a trade, not terrific. I mean, the Lizard was still, but in comparison with the rest of Cornwall, the Lizard was almost cursed here, because there was metals and minerals all over Cornwall. And Cornwall's an incredible sort of phenomena of mining and minerals and copper and tin and uranium and gold and all sorts of stuff, and the lizard didn't have really any of that. The only thing they had, apart from the Serpentine, was soapstone, which Ben been telling me all about, which was that's a very unique sort of very, very soft sort of talc type stone that was part of what's process, was it, Ben?
They made soft paste. So Bob Fells is the expert on this. I don't know whether he's here today, but they made soft paste porcelain. That's the first time that you could recreate china clay outside of the East.
There you go. Anyway, it went quiet. I mean, people didn't make a fortune. The lizard was still a hard place to find a living. It's hard. The weather is hard. The farming's hard. The fishing is hard. You know, it's a tough environment, and remains so. And so it as it got into the 20th century, it dwindled down until the First World War. And of course, the First World War, they suddenly, this is England's most southerly point, and they needed to have people looking out for submarines and channel traffic and all that sort of thing. So then lizard then picked up all through the war. There were lots of servicemen and their families billeted here, and people came to visit them, and there was a bit of a trade, and it all kept just ticking over. And then Marconi, of course, they had Marconi's, the wireless suddenly became a thing, and that attracted people to come here, not in big numbers, but it put it on the map to a certain extent. And then in the 30s, like anywhere else, it went into a horrible slump, and people left in droves, went to other countries, America and Australia, and all over the place, as they'd done when the tin mines had closed. They just had to go somewhere where they could earn a living and send some money home. And then the Second World War, came along, and then suddenly there was a radar station, and there was lots of people around again, and there was Bredannock, which was very interesting. Bredannock itself, it was a research station, and Barnes Wallis worked there, the man who invented the Dam Busters bomb. And also, I just happen to know that one of the Nissen huts at Bredannock was the first Cheshire home, because Barnes Wallis was friends of Leonard Cheshire was squadron leader of the Dam Busters squadron during the war, and then he came back and decided he wanted to do things for disabled ex-servicemen, and he couldn't find anywhere to do it, so he had his Nissen hut on Bredannock, and I actually went there. I actually met him when I was about 8, I think. I'll never forget it. It's just one of those people that you never forget you've met them. So anyway, so that happened, and then after that, buses and coaches, and then cars, and then cars, and then cars ever since. And so somehow or other, the basic core turners of the lizard have managed to keep a foothold and gone down, as you were saying, from family to family, as you were saying, generation to generation. And I'm actually not sure how many turners, full-time turners, there are now. A lot of them were part-time. They would do the turning around about this time of year to get stock for the summer, and then somebody else would sell it, and they'd go off and do something different, and then they come back and do some more next winter. So I'm not sure how many. There were six when I wrote that book, which is 20 years ago. I don't know how many there are now, but they're very creative. They're very creative, as we'll see. Let's go back through some of these. That's going from present day. They found out that you don't need big rocks. You can make very, very pretty jewellery, like this necklace. I bought one for my wife, and it's absolutely beautiful. So that's the ideal, is you can make small amounts of stone into high-priced items, and they're getting, obviously, it's a very great skill, obviously, but they're very good at it, and there's some beautiful stuff there now. And so that's how it's going now. But of course, where are we now? The saving grace of it in the tourist season was the lighthouse. Nobody knows who did the lighthouse first. There's lots of legends about which lighthouse it is. Some say it was the Eddystone, others say it's the Bishop Rock, and I don't know, anybody heard any other ideas about that? No. But what it was, the lighthouse had a certain romance about it. It was easy to turn. It was nice, you know, for the turners. It wasn't a hard job. But it spoke of the, you know, to people from the north and from the great cities of Britain, you know, it spoke of the sea and the romance of all that, and so lighthouses were made by the thousands and thousands and went home to sit on sideboards all over the country with Present for Cornwall probably written on them. Other things, ashtrays. Where did I find that other stuff? Yes, slightly more sort of. I remember this. This is sort of 1950s stuff, and you know, it had gone from, you know, lighthouses and quite beautifully crafted pieces to honest tripper trash. You know, it was really any piece of Serpentine could have, you know, Present from Cornwall written on it and a seagull stuck on it, or ashtrays, or, you know, any calendars, as you can see, any old thing would do. And it definitely lost its innocence in the 50s and became a mass market thing. And people bought it, and people did buy it. I was working in a shop in the 50s, and people, oh, look at that. God, yeah, look at it. Anyway, so what else have we got? More recently, you know, people decided to do, you know, artwork, you know, and actually there's one or two people that I've met who actually, you know, they work exclusively in Serpentine, and they produce, you know, high priced but very saleable sort of items like this one. Yeah, I've come back to that. I had a certain order in my mind when I did this, but it's obviously gone right out the window. So we'll come from Paul Tesco, and we'll go. Yes, that I can't remember. That might be grade. I'm not sure. Does anybody know? It's Llandyweddick, is it? Yes. Actually, Llandyweddick Church has got one thing that I've noticed, which is almost unique, really, in church work that I've seen, and that's the arch around the doorway is unpolished serpentine. It's actually, you know, in its natural state, and it's actually very beautiful in its way, you know. But you have to stare at it to know what it is. But you know, have a look at it next time you're down there. It's lovely. So that's Paul Tesco looking down where everything got destroyed. It stayed, you know, the steam engine stayed there for a long time, and then somebody tried to, in the 50s, tried to make a holiday camp, which was, if you know the access to Paul Tesco, you know what a daft idea that was. Anyway, but they went down there and did some mass destruction. They blew up the chimneys and the engine house and everything. They left the old fishing place there, but everything else was taken out. That's the saw pit, actually, which we'll see when we go down there. But this is you know, this is where it starts. This is most visitors' experience of it, is that they go down to Kynance and they look at the sea, and then at some point they look at the rocks and go, oh my God, look at that. And they look up the cliff and they say, oh my goodness, and they see this extraordinary range of colours, mostly red down there, but amazing. And that's just after a wave's gone out on Kynance Beach. And I've brought a few things over and put them on the table on the side there. I brought a few bits from Paul Tesco. There's a bit of blue, a bit of red. I brought a bit of the very green, hard olivine sort of serpentine I got from a cave at Kynance, and I've got a few turned pieces there which are sort of from my collection, which you're very welcome to go and have a look at. But anyway, so the story of the Serpentine is still going. You know, that's the thing about it. The turners, you know, even the time I wrote the book, good stone was getting short, and that's why smaller items are very welcome, you know, as a trade to have. The big things, the tables and the big urns, and you know, those are things of centuries ago now, because there isn't that amount of available stone that you can just go and hack it out the wall. But they get together to decide to prospect from the different areas of the lizard round the end. They have to be they're very controlled now. They have to cut and cover and put everything back the way it was once they've done some quarrying. And they sort of share, or they were certainly doing it in those days. They all got together. If a new place was prospected and being worked, they would all join in and share the expense and share the stuff. How it works now, I haven't caught up with. I'd be delighted if anybody here is connected with the trade would tell me. But I still go down to the lizard and still enjoy. And I love the lizard itself. I grew up in West Penwith, and I didn't know what the lizard was like until I started roaming around it. I didn't realise the sort of incredible contrast between these bare uplands and these gorgeously lush valleys and beautiful beaches and everything. So it's a fabulous place, and I'm really glad that by accident I was asked to actually write a book about it. So I did. So thank you all very much for listening, being patient. Anything anybody wants to ask me is more than welcome. Yes, you can applaud if you want. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions? Oh, there you go, at the back.
Yes.
Well, not a question, but really reference to Mullion. John Curtis, who was the manager of Pultesco when it did close in 1893, he set up the Mullion Serpentine Company.
Oh, really?
Was very successful here. He was a very respected person in the village, a councillor, involved in literally everybody that existed at that time. He eventually died in 1907, but for virtually 15 years he ran a very successful business and company, as I say, called the Mullion Serpentine Company. And in fact, his daughter Elizabeth married into the George family of Mullion.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what sort of scale it was on? What sort of size of things they were?
No, I mean, essentially, although he called it Mullion Serpentine Company, it was really a shop selling his merchandise.
Right.
And that was by what was then the post office, which was opposite road to what was the post office in Mrs. Bond's time. Have you got me, some of you? Right. So up there in Churchtown in Mullion, and very successful. But also, I just wonder here this evening, how many people who've been in Mullion most of their life remember people like Sid Curtis, Garfield Gilbert. They were both Serpentine turners, both from Clifton Close, which was occupied by Mullion families, and that was back in the 50s and 60s. And they were, Mike, making the sort of items that you described.
Yeah, well, it's old.
Is Dennis here this evening?
Kept people alive.
Well, right. I was born on Hendra Farm, which is up beyond Penale.
I know it.
And I've got items made from serpentine stone from Hendra Farm, and they were made by Garfield Gilbert and Sid Curtis. So there is a degree of serpentine history within this village.
Yes, very much so. I mean, it's actually, I'm not sure, the Serpentine main area begins sort of here. I'm not sure exactly where, but Mullion is the northern extent of it, and it's from here down to the bottom. Anybody else?
I'm just going to say, I just counted up, there's 17 serpentine short for the lizard.
17 Serpentine shops? Was there? That's incredible.
There's just 2 turners now. Well, there's 3 of them out there now.
Is there? Thank you.
Which is the Hill Shop, J.R.
Yes.
And John Henry is still a turner.
Is he?
And their father's
Yeah.
as well.
I mean,
Child, you know, I mean, it was just Serpentine.
yes. I mean, it's a little bit difficult to enthuse the younger generation to say, you know, how would you like to spend your life, you know, here in all the dust of the lathe, you know, sort of making Serpentine and then selling it, you know, and it's not an easy sell to young people now. So.
Of course, everybody knows Billy the Vesta or Charlie is dad, David Churchco. But I mean, you talk about, as they were called years ago, shower bags. I used to go home and Mum, we'd run back down from the village and say, do you know, Mum, there's 30 shower bangs in on the green. If you tell anybody now, they don't believe it. The fuss we have with the lizard green is unbelievable.
I can imagine.
As you all know, horrendous. But if they were there now to see 35 shower bangs on the green, you can't believe it.
Wow. Well, yeah.
My workers all done very well, let's face it.
Yeah.
You know, 17 of them, that's the ones I've counted up, probably I'm in this one, maybe 2.
Mm.
And they all managed to, you know,
Well,
are all different. It's marvellous how their
yeah.
different styles came out.
Yeah. Well, I'm quite old myself, and you know, I for a while I lived in a caravan camp at Praise Hands, and the visitors came by rail, you know, and went in and picked them up from the station, and then took them back when they wanted to go home, you know. So the car thing, you know, just happened in my lifetime.
Can I also say, on farm, Clare Farm in Mullion, Fairbarton Farm, we had it there as well. Mr. Gilbert, they used to come down there to our farm, and they would go, I don't actually know, I can't remember who was actually mining it out, but it was all put in a house, in one of our brick houses, and yeah, so I remember that time.
Yeah.
I've got 2 table lamps from
Have you?
our place.
It was successful then, because I mean, of course, not all prospecting was successful. They might find serpentine, but they might find serpentine that was very crackable and absolutely no good, or they might find, more often they'd find serpentine that was too hard to turn, you know, and so it's got to be not just serpentine, it's got to be the right kind of stuff that they can actually work on.
They've gone and made, because one of the lads out there made a chess set,
Yes,
which is absolutely marvellous.
I've seen it. Yes, it is beautiful piece of work.
It's quite hard on the lathe to do it, you know.
Well, I mean, you know, they obviously it was very delicate work. It wasn't all turning. It was a lot of carving. You know, a lot of very expert carving to make handles and things like that. You know, you can't turn them.
Intricate work.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Does anyone have any other questions? I don't know, Ben's got a question.
Firstly, I'd just like to thank Mike for that fantastic research. You know, I say that with the greatest sincerity. You know, it's something I've really enjoyed reading in your book. I have an observation to make. I have been researching mining in Mullion, and in doing that research, I found that really the time period in question is quite short. In the grand scheme of things, you know, we're really researching a time period that starts in the 18th century and finishes in the 19th century. It's just over 100 years. Now, I just checked in your book, Mike, and it was 1828 that Samuel Drew was first recorded to have been working soapstone.
Yeah.
We're in 2025, and in 3 years' time, it will be the 200th anniversary of this industry. Now, I think a celebration is called.
That's great. Huh? That's a terrific idea. That's a great idea, Ben. I'm all for that. Yes,
Because there are not many industries in Cornwall that have that long of precedent that are so important to the lizards. But you know, I use important, you know, in you know the fully relative term here. It's important to us. But I think that's remarkable. And one of the things, Mike, we were talking about before the talk was that you can find serpentine artifacts all across the country. I mean, you know, I found them as far afield in Durham. You know, in obscure churches and places that you question how they came to possess beautiful ornate fonts. And I think it would be lovely to record the distribution of these artifacts You know, that come from the lizard, that could well come from Mullion itself. It's a remarkable industry.
Yeah.
Thanks for your research.
I mean, it definitely has a circle because, as I say, lizard people thought themselves very, very unfortunate in terms of the land and the weather and where they lived and the hardship of making a living. And the heyday when there was 2 factories and all these quarries were working, there was more work than they could get men to do. And suddenly Lizard had this massive, you know, boom of prosperity and that it never dreamt of. And it sort of, you know, crested and went down again. But it, you know, it lasted the best part of 100 years.
Well, I think we'll all be coming with you to Poltesco. You fired us all up.
No,
Shall we give
that's
Mike
nice.
another round of applause?
Thank you very much.